please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
This is Bazaar Morning Call, live from the CNBC TV18 headquarters in Mumbai.
Good morning. It's a huge Gujarat wave that we are going to see today. Maybe we saw, like we said yesterday, probably a small percentage of that in the late trade when we saw this rush on the Nifty. But today it's going to be heady. The SGX Nifty is already giving us that message. 10,350 plus is what the SGX Nifty is ruling at. So chances are that's where we start, and maybe that 10,500 mark will be retained for Monday. The celebrations will be reserved for Monday simply because people will just want to know the exact margin of victory. We have numbers all the way from 100 to 135. So I guess celebrations today, bigger celebrations Monday.
Hi Lata, good morning. Right, fabulous Friday perhaps. That's what at least most of the traders are anticipating, or the experts that we spoke to yesterday. Anuj, morning. It's a given perhaps that the knee-jerk reaction will be on the upside, but what then?
Yeah, what then? That's, you know, the tricky one. Look, the market is about greed and fear, and at least in the near term, you don't want to talk about logic. So obviously today, even though the market went into exit polls with long positions, 4 out of 5 days have been good. But the fact that, it's not a scrape-through victory that the exit polls are indicating. And, normally if you observe the trend of bipolar elections in this country, Sonia, the actual outcome is even bigger than what the exit polls indicate. Exit poll only gives you direction. The actual numbers are higher, like you saw in the case of UPS. Numbers are higher, like you saw in the case of UP as well. So there's a good chance, and just a slight bit of disagreement here in the sense that if you saw in 2014 as well, the market, the big day happened on exit poll day itself. The market didn't actually wait for the actual event. The only issue here is that what happens after a gap up, because you already had a decent rally. I think for that to happen, you will need to see either the gap up sustaining post 10 a.m. or even if there's a dip, if someone sells, say, at opening tech, in that case for the market to start to bounce back. Though having said that, there are a lot of people who would have sold and, taken home their profit, gone into cash. I think that money would come back. So this would now make a floor for the market.
So that is for today, right?
Yes.
For an intraday trader.
Yes.
But what's the bigger picture looking like, Anuj? Because we all know that an FI investor or any investor loves stability. And given these numbers, if they fructify, that's one thing that's certain, right? That this is a stable government. So are we looking at a lot more money coming in now? The
big risk after GST was that world over, after GST, the governments lose, right? And in that case, this was a big test. I mean, after demonetization, Prime Minister Modi, of course, went and won the biggest state, which is UP. And after dual disruption of demonetization and GST, which is supposed to actually impact a state like Gujarat the most, and let's say that these numbers translate into actual numbers. We still don't know that. If he wins Gujarat, I think that Modi premium that the market has and we've been talking about, I think that would get a fresh bit of re-rating. And all you would need is some stability in the global market, because that's also a big cue. Of late, the big reason that we had corrected was not Gujarat. The reason that we had corrected was because global markets were down and crude had gone up. So I think that bit of stability needs to return. But the fact that you have a public which is willing to back the Prime Minister in these moves, I think that's something that the market would like. And there's a good chance that, the market will then start to build in 2019. If they had lost, Sonia, in that case, it would have led to a derating of the market, because in that case, 2019, the basic premise of the rally would have been at risk. I think that risk is now out the window, once again, with an assumption that these numbers translate into actual numbers as well.
Well, I don't know, that much I'm not doubting. I mean, if all the polls are indicating one direction, it's difficult to believe. I can believe that maybe the percentage would be different, because there were a lot of people who spoke yesterday who had been on the ground and said that there was genuine turmoil because of GST in Gujarat. And therefore, I mean, the margin of victory could be a matter of discussion. For me, I think what this definitely, upscales is the bottom of the market. But at the top, as Anuj was saying, we once again will start will start moving to global cues, depending on how crude behaves and yield, how the bond yields behave. There will be those things will return. So life beyond 10,500 is definitely going, something which would be a question mark. If the smart money continues to prefer developed markets over emerging markets, and if crude once again becomes a macro problem for us, life above 10,500 again will become a valuations question. Again, we will have to look at third quarter earnings. All those will start now coming into play. So today's gap up and 10,500 scaling is possible. Beyond that, we have to really, I think we'll become once again open to global cues.
Exactly.
Open to domestic
Just one more point. If you see the template of this market, the reasons follow, and the markets, for now, we are talking about 10,500 as big resistance. Once that is taken out, that will then become the next floor for the market, Sonia. And one more point. Today, HDFC Bank, I think that's one stock which has corrected a bit, has been a bit soft. There's a good chance that, that the QIP that they're going to raise the money, that would be the next trigger for this market. And it's corrected from its highs of about 1,900. I won't be surprised if this is the first to actually, run through the races and, make a new high and sort of lead the market. It's the captain of the market, the Nifty and the Bank Nifty, in both cases, the #1 contributor. So I think that would be really the stock.
I know it's 30% of the Nifty Bank, so
exactly.
it's HDFC Bank. And today it will make a move because it's announcing its QIP.
Yes.
So clearly the Nifty Bank, which was the sulker so far, has every chance of now regaining leadership of the market. It's also actually backed by Finance Minister yesterday tweeting that they're going to put PSU Bank recapitalization on a priority. So equally for both reasons, I think Nifty Bank today has a good chance of outperforming the Nifty.
Okay, well, that's the view coming in from a lot of our experts too. So let's kickstart on that note. Let's take a look at what our wise experts have to say as we head into trade this Friday morning. Sanjeev Prasad of Kotak says that most exit polls are suggesting a victory for the BJP in Gujarat. This, he says, will be received well by the market, while a surprise defeat would be a large negative surprise. In the former case of a win, Kotak sees a modest rally, and in the latter, a moderate correction, as the market will also start focusing on India's weakening macro position. Sanjeev adds that India's macro has weakened significantly in the past few months. The equity market seems to be much more sanguine about India's macro than the bond market. He adds that he does not like the absolute valuations of the bulk of the market, with most of the consumption stocks trading at rich valuations and discounting FY19 earnings fully and even FY20 in several cases.
That point has to be taken. Clearly, this note has been written before the exit poll numbers were known, perhaps, because, he's giving that margin of possibility of a BJP defeat. But that said, valuations is... Yesterday, we spoke to a lot of global experts, including Yan Den. There is that discomfort with valuations. So they will have to look at third quarter earnings. Right up to FY20 earnings are already in the price, technically speaking, or going by historical valuations. So that, yes, that will be a cap for the market. And yesterday, our market master was telling us they expect just 5% earnings growth for this fiscal, right? So the second half of the year is also expected to be bleak. But we also have Indranil Sengupta of Bank of America Merrill Lynch, who gives us his view. Takes forward the election theme. He says they continue to advise investors to play consumption over investment in the run-up to the summer 2019 polls. Farm loan waivers in particular should double to $40 billion from $20 billion so far. This, along with the possible La Nina, will help support rural demand. Second, states will likely speed up the implementation of the 7th Pay Commission, and the centre will also want to extend it to public sector undertakings by the 2019 polls. Indranil feels this will likely add a consumption stimulus of 0.2 to 0.5% of GDP for the next 2 years. And finally, Sengupta adds that their expectation is that the upcoming union budget will raise the income tax exemption limit. Okay, that's a huge consumption call. Okay, let's get to some money market views. Deepali Bhargava of Credit Suisse remains constructive on the rupee. She says their forex team has recently upgraded their 3-month INR forecast to 64 compared to 65 earlier on broad US dollar weakness. Despite Credit Suisse's expectations of higher inflation and a wider current account deficit next year, she expects CPI inflation to remain contained in the RBI's target range and FDI flows to remain robust. I think that's a very big, addition to FX, FDI flows genuinely will be very big because of political stability.
Yes.
You know, FIIs have a lot of other options. They may want to go to, you know, developed markets because there the delta is higher, or they may go to a commodity currency because the delta is higher. But when it comes to growth and political stability, I guess FDI flows are going to be strong. And
when we got the pre-election tracker, if you remember, it had indicated that the Congress is gaining ground in Gujarat. Post that, FI flows had actually tapered off a bit in the starting part of December, but now perhaps there could be some resumption of flows. But let's tell you what the bond market is talking about. Bhaskar Panda says, as far as the Indian 10-year benchmark yield is concerned, the recent downtrend may continue. He expects a range of 7.1 to 7.15% today.
Okay. All right. Well, we will keep coming to the big story, the Gujarat exit polls outcome. And at the moment, we are going to be joined by a couple of guests. Okay, Sanjay Kumar of CSDS has joined us now. Good morning, Sanjay, and thank you very much for joining us this early. In a bit, we are going to be joined by Mr. Swapan Das Gupta as well, MP Rajya Sabha. Sanjay, you know, the CSDS polls and other polls indicate a bit of a gap. Now, what is it? Is it a vote seat conversion that goes that is different for everybody? Why is it that there is such a wide... There was one poll even giving 99 to the BJP. I can't remember which one. But there is a wide variation. You guys stand in the middle. Why this kind of a variation?
It is not only the vote seat conversion, I believe, because you mentioned about one poll which is giving the 99, which is the lowest figure. This is the Axis My India poll. Yeah. And actually, if we go by the vote share estimates, actually they are saying that the gap between Congress and BJP is likely to be 5%, 4 or 5%. Okay. While we are estimating in our polls conducted by CSDS that the gap is going to be 9%. So it is not merely vote seat conversion, it is also about making an assessment of how big is the victory going for the BJP, how big is likely to be the victory for the BJP. So there is also this vote share estimates difference.
Okay, that's fair point. We have Swapan Das Gupta also joining us, MP of Rajya Sabha. Swapan, good morning. What would this victim, we are assuming that these numbers translate into actual numbers, but if they retain Gujarat with same numbers or maybe even higher, politically, how significant would that be?
Well, politically, I think it is significant insofar as it meets off a particular challenge. You know, in the normal circumstances, Gujarat would have been a predictable election. Yeah. But it's been presented as a touch-and-go election, which affects the efficacy of Mr. Modi's economic policies, because it was presented that Gujarat that the BJP was confronted with a challenge over GST, over popularity, and the same old story over demonetization. Now, I think it's important from the government's point of view to actually get rid of this particular perception once and for all. And I think Gujarat presented an opportunity, just as UP presented an opportunity after demonetization, to get rid of this bogey around the GST, and that whether it's going to continue, whether it's so unpopular that it may have to be junked, etc. So it's on those 2 points of the economic policy. And I think there's another different point, which is that I think in Gujarat we were also being confronted with the question of, does the government have the will, the political will, the resilience to be able to carry out major economic reforms? If you cross the Gujarat hump, and if you pass this test successfully, then you're back on track.
Absolutely.
So, Swapan, good morning. So, the exit polls suggest that voters have now voted for predictability and not so much for change. So, in that context, you think the BJP could get more arsenal to accelerate those reforms that could not see the light of day earlier?
I mean, first let's wait for the actual results, because I think, the exit polls are often prone to a large degree of error. So we must always wait for that. But I think what basically points out is that BJP is going to retain Gujarat. And the question is, what is the quantum of their victory? That's really what I think what the exit poll leaves uncertain.
Yeah.
Now, you see, I don't think it's a question of reforms. The reforms are always tough in terms of selling them to the electorate, and they always require a great deal of political conviction and a political deftness. In the case of Gujarat, what we found is that Gujarat is a state which has actually had a large measure of reforms. So it was never the question that Gujarat's ability to digest reforms was never in doubt. I think what we are seeing, the real challenge in Gujarat is a different one. It is that after the very strong chief minister departs from the scene, you get a certain leadership void. It was their ability to handle that transition which really was the question in Gujarat. And you were also confronted with a new type of challenge, which was this caste reservation issue, which Gujarat had not confronted for a very, very long time, for about 30 years. And now you confront it. So when you had on one hand the challenges posed by modernity, which is the real issues of economic reforms, and then you had the old problem of caste reservation coming up to see how this could be managed. Any regression in Gujarat would have had a tremendous knock-on effect in the rest of the country. So therefore it was important from the BJP to ward off this particular challenge. Any defeat for the BJP or any serious setback for the BJP in Gujarat would have had a knock-on effect, which I think would have affected India's larger journey.
No, I take your point. Actually, Swapan, there is no denying that Gujarat is the most entrepreneurial state. I mean, I don't have actual numbers, but I guess the number of SMEs and MSMEs also will be higher, simply because it's not a salaried class mentality at all that is there in that state.
Absolutely.
So there was a genuine challenge in terms of riding the GST initial disruption, in the state. So it is a massive victory. It cannot be diluted at all that if anybody would challenge GST, it won't come in Karnataka or Tamil Nadu. The challenge would have come only in Gujarat. And if Gujarat is so solidly behind the NDA and the BJP, then clearly that's a very big political vote for the Prime Minister. But, actually, Sonia was asking you about reforms. I think they've taken all the tough decisions already. What's more left in the plate in terms of reforms? I think it's only execution, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is basically. I think more or less it's done. It's done. Now we are talking not so much in reform, but execution of projects. I mean, the bullet train is not a reform. It's really getting a particular project off the ground. And in Gujarat, you always manage to showcase various things. Now, the challenge really, to my mind, was how this reservation issue came up. Now, that presents a very alternative and a very different picture of the priorities of India.
Absolutely.
And so meeting that particular challenge was important.
Absolutely.
And any setback on that front, can you imagine what the consequences would have been in the rest of the country?
No, I agree. Actually, even in the previous election, I thought when the Congress was offering free electricity or, reduced prices of electricity, Prime Minister Modi stood his ground and said that, you have to price it correctly. So, these are very important lessons for the way in which a political economy will shape up. I take a point entirely on that. That's why this victory becomes important for the story of Indian reform. But let me just get one more word. You spoke about the error margin in exit polls, and let me get Sanjay on that. What are the error margins at all? In the Lok Sabha polls, there was no question because it was such a huge wave. And I would think even in Gujarat, there should not be such a big error margin. Of course, we were, surprised in Brexit. These are all countries where the population sampling should be easier because they're more uniform populations. As well, the Trump poll, the exit pollsters got it completely wrong. But would you say that in India, error margins, historically, not so much, isn't it, if you go by the 2014 poll? Sanjay?
Yeah, normally when we do the polls of, say, a sample of, say, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, the error margin is normally in the range of 2 to 3%. But the way exit poll has predicted, all the exit poll, if we say, I don't think the error of margin is in the direction that it can actually change the electoral outcome. The seats for BJP may be slightly less, slightly more with the 2 or 3% margin. I don't rule out that. If a poll says 110 seats for BJP, it could be even say about 100 seats, or it could even go up to 120 seats. But I don't think the error of margin is to the extent of actually changing the electoral outcome when we see the results on December 18. But I wanted to add a few things about, there was a discussion going on about GST and demonetization. See, the same poll which we have conducted, and we have conducted 4 rounds of poll, the same poll on the basis of which we are saying BJP is likely to get something in the range of 113 to 122 seats. But the same poll also says people are actually not that happy with demonetization and GST. The people are critical about demonetization, people are critical about GST. It is a different story that when people go out to vote on the election day, it is not, they are not voting only on the consideration of GST and demonetization. So winning election doesn't mean that everything is good. All these policies have been endorsed. We all know when you go out to vote, there are several considerations. Which consideration is heavily on your mind? Actually, finally that guides your voting intention.
No, actually, I take your point. You know, there were a lot of our own reporter team and other senior journalists who said that there was palpable anger with respect to GST in Gujarat. Swapan, how do you think the government will take this forward? There is genuine disruption, but in spite of it, you like this government. You like it for its predictability. That doesn't mean I don't have a thing or two against it on certain issues. Do you think this will change the way in which the government, the central government, will behave?
One of the major consequences of that expression of that discontent was that there were certain modifications which were done to the GST regime. Not least of which was that, you know, the compliance thing, which the compliance regime, which had been too stringent, had been relaxed, and people had been given a little more leeway to, you know, file returns, etc. So, which really helped the smaller guys. I think, firstly, that element of responsiveness, especially since the feedback of the GST coincided with the Gujarat elections. There was a willingness of the government to take into account this feedback, and I think that's important. If there is a government which actually sits on its high horse and says, no, we've done this thing and we won't change, then I think you're going to be a problem. One of the reasons why the BJP was able to absorb the shocks of the GST disruption, and there was disruption, was because it was also it had the ability to be flexible and to demonstrate that there was a willingness to take into account a human touch. So I think it's always that which is very important in management of reforms, that to have that little flexibility, not be entirely rigid, because often reforms work in different ways in the whole of the country, and there are unexpected twists and turns about it in a country as large as India.
And especially when it has to be implemented by a gargantuan bureaucracy. Yes, Swapan Das Gupta, Sanjay, thank you very much for joining us this morning and setting the stage for what is going to be a very interesting day of trade as well. Thanks for joining us, and I'm sure we're going to touch base with you on Monday when the actual results come in.
Thank you.